All right, as we wrap up our discussion for week 8, I wanted to take some time to talk about Queen Victoria, Britain's longest reigning monarch, because she's really a remarkable example of how a European monarch managed um, to rule with concern for the people, to really fashion herself a leader for the people. And her influence was really far reaching and profound. Millions of European and American women would model themselves after her or would be influenced by her style of dress, by her attitude, by um, some of the ideals that she put forth during her reign. She was remarkably skilled at making herself a woman of the people, dressing like the people, showing a concern for the people, and um, her influence, we cannot emphasize it enough because many millions of American women, middle class women, upper class women, would model themselves after her to a degree, and many of them did it unconsciously without even realizing that they had embraced certain Victorian ideals. So we're going to take some time to talk about this really remarkable woman. Let's start from the beginning here. Queen Victoria, as we move into this discussion, I want you to understand that this is another example of conservative backlash. So we've talked about conservative backlash and how the dominant class was trying to reestablish control and to maintain order and to put to rest some of the liberal ideals of revolutionary reform in the 18th and 19th century. And she was remarkably capable of doing that. But she did it by fashioning herself a woman of the people and by ruling with a concern for the people, or at least making it very clear to average people that she was concerned about what average people did. Uh, Queen Victoria was born in London May 24th, 1819. She was the only daughter of Edward, the Duke of Kent, who died soon after her birth. She became heir to the throne in 1837 at the age of 18 years old. After William IV, her father's brother, passed away without leaving any legitimate children to take over. So, as was so often the case in England, she was elevated to the throne through circumstance and really happenstance, a set of events. She knew that there was certainly a possibility that she would become queen, but that did not become completely evident until she was about 17 years old. Though she had been groomed for the possibility of becoming queen for some period of time. We'll talk a little bit about some of her personal effects and some of the things that made her unique. Victoria enjoyed many of the enlightened reforms of the 19th century. She enjoyed art and drawing, painting, and writing. She kept a diary throughout her life in which she kept really detailed accounts of various events. What you see pictured here is a copy of one of her journals where she jotted some of her thoughts, including a small sketch of her hairpiece on her wedding day. And you'll find the journal entry from her wedding day transcribed at the link that you see there. I encourage you to take a look at that and some of her other journal entries. She was really a prolific writer, and so we know an awful lot about what she felt, what she thought, and how she lived her life as a result of her writings. Queen Victoria married a German prince, Prince Albert. In 1840, she married her first cousin. This was not at all uncommon. I know there's a kind of an ick factor today when we think about cousins marrying one another, but this was not at all uncommon, particularly for distant cousins that were of elite status. This idea of marrying into nobility and forging these political relationships based on noble families was not at all uncommon among European royalty, and so she was really kind of following tradition in marrying Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. He was the younger son of her uncle Ernest, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, and here we have a photograph of their wedding. And so as you can see here, he is decked out in all of his regalia and finery. He was certainly of elite status himself. But he was elevating his social and political position by marrying the Queen of England. This was remarkable. He was a prince, but by forging this relationship with Queen Victoria, it certainly made him more powerful than he probably ever would have been in Prussia or Germany. And here we have some portraits of Queen Victoria and the prince, and done by a German painter in 1842. The portrait of the royal family that you see here in 1846, we have Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. The pair had 9 children between the years of 1840 and 1857, so as a couple they were quite prolific. And Queen Victoria, one of the Victorian traditions that she started in England, one that was exported to the United States, was that of Christmas traditions that had become certainly well known in Germany, but because of her relationship with this German prince, she embraced some of the Germanic traditions of Christmas, the decoration of indoor trees, the exchange of cards at Christmas. These are traditions that had become popular in Germany, but Victoria liked them. She embraced many of these customs as she incorporated Albert's heritage into Christmas celebrations in England. Here we have an engraving of the royal family gathered around the Christmas tree. This is in 1848, and this went a long way in popularizing some of these holiday traditions. There were quite a few changes during Victoria's rule. She attempted to identify with the urban middle class in England, and particularly with women, by cultivating an air of virtue and piety, morality, and purity as part of her public persona. Now, according to Victoria, women were supposed to be defenders of the family and the home and the hearth of domesticity. So it was this idea that women were the spiritual and moral foundation of the home, that women were to remain within the household and really untainted by the sinful state of society. So it was this idea that women had a place within the household, that they were to be caretakers and educators of children, that women were, and this is very important, that women were morally superior to men. Men were so often victims to their own wanton sexual desires and their inherently lascivious or carnal nature. So it was decided that women were above this sort of thing, that women were supposed to be removed from society, removed from some of the more lascivious elements of European culture, and that they were to be the moral foundation of the home and spiritual center of the home. Women were supposed to encourage their husband's higher nature. So it was this idea that women were supposed to improve men, that they were a helpmeet and a support for men, that women were to be devoid of passion, that women were supposed to be proper and prim and devout. And this was an effort by middle-class women to exercise some power over their own bodies by creating a cultural restraint on sexual activity for middle-class women to limit family size. The fact was, birth control was frowned upon. It was certainly considered to be immoral to practice any type of birth control, and there were certainly many types of birth control available to the British and to other Europeans at this time. But particularly for upwardly mobile urban middle-class women, the idea of using birth control was horrifying. And so women were trying to create a social and cultural restraint on sexual activity in order to limit family size, to limit reproduction. And Victoria thought that this was a good idea. She understood and recognized the need to limit family size, particularly for lower class women. The fact was, women had no control over their bodies. They had no control over sexual reproduction. And so it was very, very common for lower class women to have 6, 7, 8 children. And then, the husband would either disappear, or perhaps he was a drunkard, or perhaps he was killed in an industrial accident, or perhaps he simply abandoned the woman. Perhaps he was abusive. And so lower class women were really reduced to what they would be capable of doing and how they would be able to provide for their family. The larger the family, the more challenging it was going to be for a lower class woman to care for that family, to feed that family, to put children through school, to provide a quality of life for them. And so Victoria understood the importance of allowing women some control over their own reproductive function. And so this went a long way in allowing women some sense of control over their reproductivity. And while men did not like it, did not appreciate it, this became a very powerful cultural constraint in Britain and, more broadly speaking, in Europe and the U.S. During Queen Victoria's reign, there were some ridiculous double standards for women. Infidelity for men was considered to be an unfortunate but reluctantly accepted reality for many married women during this time. If middle-class women were adhering to these moralist standards of proper Victorian womanhood as pure and dispassionate, then the fact was men were going to get their needs met somewhere else, and they often did this by eliciting the services of a prostitute. To give you some sense of how this took place, understand that by 1850, there were 15,000 prostitutes working in Vienna, Austria. There were 50,000 prostitutes in Paris, France, where prostitution was actually a state-sanctioned vocation. There were 80,000 prostitutes operating just in the city of London, where hundreds of lodging houses doubled as brothels. So prostitution was a terrible problem that was in some way spurred on by this idea of Victorian womanhood, excuse me. So men were seen as less prone to give in to their baser desires and instincts, and thus it was considered to be natural for a man to step out on his wife, whereas a middle-class woman that had an affair with another man would immediately be branded a social pariah. The man would divorce her because he had been dishonored by her behavior. So there were these ridiculous double standards. A man could engage in illicit relations or extramarital relations, and it was considered to be this kind of unfortunate reality. But if a woman did this, forget it. She would immediately be divorced. And in the divorce proceedings, the courts almost always sided with the man and allowed him to take whatever he wanted from the marriage while divorcing his unfaithful and unnatural wife who had failed to live up to the Victorian ideal of feminine piety and self-discipline. And as fair as this may seem, the Victorian model was transported all over the world, including the United States, where it was widely embraced by middle and upper class women, and even many lower class women. Now, I don't want to suggest that women were able to dramatically reduce the number of children that they had, or that they were able to maintain absolute control of their bodies or of their reproductive function. That was never really the case. But certainly for upper class and middle class women, they tried, and they did embrace many of the Victorian ideals during this time period. Now, Prince Albert's role was very unique. Albert's interests were really rooted in the arts, science, trade, and industry. He was very forward-thinking. He was an enlightened ruler. He was one of the men responsible for organizing the Great Exhibition, of 1851, which showcased industrial technology and design, as well as Britain's role as a global industrial leader. The Great Expedition's profits actually helped establish several museums in London. He became interested in reforming education in Britain and was a strong supporter of a movement to end slavery worldwide. He also took an active role in running the Queen's household and several estates under the jurisdiction of the royal family. Here we have this photo taken of Albert. It was taken in 1860. In 1862, Prince Albert was still a young man. He was 42 years old when he contracted typhoid fever and perished. And after his death, Victoria was terribly depressed and wore black for a good portion of the remainder of her reign. The mourning queen actually avoided public appearances until the late 1860s, so for several years she was really out of the public eye, although she continued to meet her duties of correspondence and private audiences. Here we have several images of Victoria later in life, and as you can see, a very kind of dour countenance and very serious monarch was the Queen. Now, on the image in the right, you can see there she's wearing all of her finery and many of the trappings of royalty, but there on the left, much more consistent with this idea of Victorian womanhood, kind of drab clothing, very serious, nothing too ostentatious, and she tried to cultivate this image with women in Britain and, more broadly speaking, throughout the world. The end of an era came when Queen Victoria died on January 22nd of 1901. She reigned for 63 years. This is the longest reign of any European monarch. She is buried next to Prince Albert at the Royal Grounds in Windsor, England.